All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 376. Mawwiage is what brings us together today. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and
Hello.
we have the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, in the background. You won't get to hear him, but he is making it possible for us to have the vertical live stream as well as the horizontal live stream. And it's always good when you can remain vertical when you're supposed to be awake. So we'll see if I can do that today. And no sleep today. So, but in the meantime, before we get into this riveting feminist tripe, we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justtip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, we are still on UN Women. That sounds like some kind of a drug, doesn't it? But it's not. It's unfortunately just a misfortune that we're stuck with UN Women, and it's mostly because no matter what country you're in right now, they're screwing around with your laws. If you live in any nation on the continent of South America or the continent of Africa, they are actively fucking with your laws right now. And that's what we've been looking at. This one is about Africa. And so if it's normal in your culture for marriage to have, say, a tradition of the husband being the head of household and the wife being his helpmate, you might not like the feminist outlook on marriage here.
It's like a drug that ruins your life and doesn't even feel good, like meth.
Heroin. Yeah. But unfortunately, well, I guess I don't know how heroin would feel for other people, but I know I'm allergic to all opiates, so I don't.
I guess heroin is appropriate because it's named after a female hero.
Yeah,
which
there we
usually
go.
turns out to be an effect with diminishing returns, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, there aren't really very many real heroic female heroes. There are a lot of things people call female heroes, but actual heroes that are female are few and far between. It's a very sad situation. You have to go back in history to find them for the most part.
The last one we had in Britain was Thatcher, and everyone hated her. The last one before that was Boadicea, and that was like 3,000 years ago, I should say.
So there you go, guys.
And that's shrouded in the fog of history, shall we say?
Yep. But I don't want to go through the entire thing here about marriage, but there's a couple of things that I do want to highlight. And this is kind of interesting, right? And again, this is UN Women. They want this encoded specifically into law in all nations in Africa. The first one sounds okay, right? No marriage shall take place without the free and full consent of both parties. Duh, right? But the second one is interesting. The minimum age for marriage shall be 18 years, would have been sufficient if that's the age of majority, their age of adulthood there, which it might be. But that's not what it says. It says the minimum age of marriage for women will be 18 years. So they only want it encoded into law that women can't get married before the age of majority. They don't want it encoded into law that women cannot marry underage boys. Kind of interesting. And then they want to dictate what marriage means. Monogamy is encouraged as the preferred form of marriage, and that the rights of women in marriage and family, including in polygamous marital relationships, are promoted and protected. So this is another one. They want to control. They want to say something is wrong, but then they also want to control it. Right? Some cultures do have a tradition of a man being able to have more than one wife, and it is a cultural practice. It might be legal in the nation because it is a cultural practice. So they want to legislate that the culture has to change.
Sorry, I had to read this step a few times. Monogamy is encouraged as the preferred form of marriage, and that, although it should be, but that the rights of women in marriage and family, including in polygamous marital relationships, are promoted and protected. So we prefer monogamy on paper, but if you happen to prefer polygamy, that's fine too. So
like,
this preference,
make up your mind, ladies.
It's not a rule; it's just a suggestion. So if you want your country taken over by certain religions and certain legal traditions, or even the legal obligations that enforce that you have to go ahead with polygamous relationships, if a particular religion tells you that it's okay, then that's fine too. All right, okay, that's good. So,
what's funny to me about this is in the United States, a lot of social justice warriors promote a lifestyle called polyamory, in which a couple may have another partner or two other partners or 4 or 5, depending on what their choices are. And a woman might have multiple male partners, or a man might have multiple female partners, and they think it's great, which for most people, it's not. Most couples, most groups can't really handle it, especially if there is not a good gender balance to it. A lot of jealousy ensues, and it results in a catastrophic breakdown of the relationship over time, and eventually a blowout in most cases. But they encourage it anyway, and in particular, multiple men with one woman. But apparently they're upset if the genders are reversed on that, because tradition is bad.
And this is why we keep pointing out that the affectations of Islam, although a lot of Westerners like to call Islam just this horrifically misogynistic system, where women are not given any advantages and only men are given the advantages. But here we see Islam offers women the opportunity. What are women? Yes, it offers women the opportunity to be with um, the perfect man who earns millions every year, and it offers multiple women to be with that same man. Like this is difficult to obtain in a monogamous culture where it's one woman to one man, because a lot of men will rise to the top of the heap, and that leaves, shall we say, 3/4 of men below the heap. And in a culture where women demand all the power that men have, Islam gives women the opportunity to crowd together in 4s and 5s and 6s, and crowd around the most successful men. It's the tournament species, folks. It's like what gorillas have. It's like what a lot of primates have, where women don't have to worry about having to settle for a lesser man, or even the average man. The vast majority of them can rally around the most successful men, and this is what we're seeing in so much of the West nowadays. Ever since feminism took root in our civilization, like they all want the best of men. Like 80% of women want the best 1% of men, and like, how is that supposed to work? If anything is supposed to be monogamous? But yeah, it doesn't make sense from the pair bonding point of view, but it makes perfect sense from the tournament point of view, where the majority of the women surround the top percentile of men. And I'm like, feminists will say this isn't feminism. Polygamy isn't feminism. Yes, it is. Yes, it fucking is. Because you all want resources from the very best of men. And so obviously, when feminism reaches its final conclusion, you'll be fine with sharing the top 1% of men, because it's much better for you than just pair bonding with someone at your same level. And how to quite explain what that same level is? Well, it's mostly financial. It's mostly based on resources. It's the difference between pair bonding and tournament. Like I say, this is what made us distinct from the other ape species, that we could finally develop a pair bonding situation where women can be like, I don't need resources. I just need a man who's at my same level and will help me raise my children at the same level. But and that is what we had for many thousands of years. But that wasn't good enough for women. Certainly not since the advent of romantic chivalry, and certainly not since the advent of the politicization of romantic chivalry that we call feminism. So yeah, the end game of feminism is in fact something a bit like Islam.
Yeah.
I know that's hard for people to hear, because they think, well, surely Islam is the opposite of feminism. No, it is the end game of feminism, where women can just be like, I don't give a fuck about men as human beings. We only give a fuck about men as banks, as wallets, as resource monkeys. And if it means 4 of us have to share the same rich man, rather than each one of us having to pair bond with the average man, then hell yes, we'll take 4 of us crowding around the richest man, or indeed more than 4 of us, or indeed all of us crowding around the richest entity called the government.
Yeah,
and that's what's happening at this point. The majority of women in any given country in the West is crowding around this abstract secular replacement for the male godhead that is the government.
the most well-known historical incarnation of that, I think, is King Solomon and his 500 wives. And I just want to remind everybody that in the book of Proverbs written by King Solomon, no less than 4 times he talked about just how awful it is living under the same roof as a quarrelsome woman. He also wrote other verses about the character of a quarrelsome woman, and it's just stuff like that. But no less than 4 times, he specified that it was better to live in the far corner of the roof of the house than under the roof with a quarrelsome woman, exposed to the weather and sandstorms and whatever else might be happening. Because who wants to be around her? Who wants to be around that bitch, right? And that is essentially the conclusion of having 500 wives. Is that bitches be unpleasant. So there you go. In terms of multiple partner marriage, though, it is very interesting to me. Feminists treat polygamy in Western countries as though it demeans women and as though it is ownership and such, right? But then they encourage polyandry. So what does that say about how they think of men? And in the meantime, again, like this is a cultural thing. You cannot just dictate in law that a culture will change. It doesn't work. And the way that people handle it is simply the same way that people who want to be in polyamorous relationships in the West handle it. They have maybe one couple actually gets married, maybe 2 couples actually get married, and then all 4 of them live together. But they're obviously not all 4 able to be married to each other. Some of the partners aren't legally married, and some of them are. And it doesn't seem to be the thing that destroys these relationships. Like I said, it usually does result in things like jealousy. And the really rotten thing about polyamorous relationships, as opposed to, cultural polygamy, is that a lot of times you have, it starts out open, or people confuse polyamory with open relationships, and then you have this discovery that for every opportunity the male partner gets to be with somebody other than the female partner will get 10 to 50 opportunities and turn most of them down, but not all of them. And she will accept more than he gets in most cases. And that usually leaves him out in the cold. And it's a particularly bad thing when it is that gender balance, because men do have a stronger and more frequent libido than women do. Where with polygamous relationships, at least what you've got going on in that household is the sex with the lower libido gets to split the wifely duties among themselves, and the sex with the higher libido has more opportunity. So that actually fits the sexes better. Not that it's an ideal relationship. I have come to the conclusion that for the majority of people, monogamy works best. It's a very rare thing for you to run into people that actually can handle any polyamorous relationship, whether it's polygamy, polyandry, whether it's an open relationship, whatever. I think that more often than not, what you end up with is multiplication of the conflicts that take place in relationships, the problems that you have to solve in order to keep your relationship strong. And you don't necessarily get a multiplication of the dedication that it takes and the ethics that it takes in your relationship to keep the relationship strong. And so it falls apart. But again, I wouldn't go to some other country where the norm is polygamy and say, you guys have to change because that's bullshit. Things are different in a culture where that's the cultural norm. That's their business to figure out. And a world government shouldn't be getting involved in that. And in fact, I genuinely think the government should get the fuck out of marriage altogether. The only thing that government should have to do with it is if you make a marriage contract and then someone violates the contract, the other person should be able to take the violator to court for breach of contract. That's it. Everything else, should be handled by the contract and not by the government. The church, maybe, if your marriage is through a church, and if it's not, a contract would still cement the marriage.
I have to I have to contend this idea that men have a greater libido than women. It seems that way in a lot of contexts, but when you look at the kind of entertainment that women prefer compared with the kind of entertainment that men prefer, I mean, men prefer action movies and women prefer romance movies, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, but romance movies are made to appeal to women's egos, not necessarily their libido.
No, but
like especially rom-coms, like those are ego, not
but
they're
I mean,
vanity boosters.
and again, we look at the porn that men and women consume. There's this stereotype
Yeah.
that men need pornography because they can't possibly survive without thinking of sex every 7 seconds, and that's a total lie. By the way, this is one of these factoids that's just been expressed across the civilization without ever being fact checked. That men think about sex every 7 seconds, without ever expressing how often women think about sex. I think women think about sex more than men do, and is only one element of this difference. The idea that men think about sex more than women think about sex, it seems like utter bollocks to me. It's just the main difference is what turns men on and what turns women on. Men can easily find something that turns them on sexually. With women, they find it more difficult to find something that turns them on sexually, because with men, all they need is a woman, a woman who looks like a woman and acts like a woman, and who is generally nice to them. But a woman is not turned on until she has found a towering resource monkey. You know what I mean? That's more difficult to find. It's not. It's not that the women have a lower libido. It's just that they have higher standards in partners
Um,
than men do.
there's been numerous studies that have shown that men have more frequent and more intense sexual desires than women. Women might think about sex a lot, but a lot of women's thoughts about sex are about how to use it in a manipulative way,
But that still
or how to
counts,
be the
doesn't
center
it?
of a man's attention. No, it's not libido. That's not libido. That's ego again. Like libido is your desire, your desire for sexual gratification and sexual intimacy. And manipulativeness isn't intimacy, and it's not sexual gratification, it's material gratification. So there is a difference, and it's the reason why women are so able to use sex to manipulate men, because
I guess
women
it
can.
explains why almost all prostitutes are women.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, almost all prostitutes are almost all prostitutes are in service to men, but that there are prostitutes that are in service to women as well. That's the other thing. Um, Women's libido peaks at a much older age than men's libido peaks at, which is odd. Um, but so then you get these horny, divorced, middle-aged women that go to foreign countries where male prostitution is more. It's easier to find on sex tourism vacations, basically. And usually they go looking for teenage boys, which I think is really gross. But that's because I raised kids. I would think that most women who raised kids would think that was really gross, but apparently that's not the case. Then again, some women apparently like men who are built like cattle. So, what do I know? um, but yeah, women's libido is weirder than men's libido, and women will respond with sexual readiness to things that have absolutely nothing to do with sex. And but they in terms of actually being in the mood and deciding to do something, or wanting to do something, it is a more frequent experience among men, and as a result, women do end up using sex to manipulate men. Women do sell sex more than men sell sex, and men are stuck in a position of involuntary celibacy more often than women are. And I would say the women that are all clamoring for the top guy that don't merit the top guy are not involuntarily celibate. They're just refusing to play in their own league. So, whereas there are men who don't have a league, and it sucks, and it doesn't seem fair that there should be people who don't have a league. There are not very many women who don't have a league, but there are men who don't. Even women who are in the category of like profound intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities, like where that might keep a man from being able to find a partner, it doesn't keep a woman from being able to find a partner. So
well,
it is there is a significant difference in standards, and a lot of it is partly because part of it I think is because men have always had to be nicer, but part of it is because men are more um the word is desperate doesn't fit, but definitely interested. Men are more interested.
all things being equal, it stands to reason that the most sex desperate people are the elderly who have not found a partner, and that seems to be the case with women.
Yeah.
Elderly or middle-aged women who have not yet found a partner are the horniest. But the horniest males it goes all the way up and down the age spectrum including men in their 20s and men in their 30s, because they find it so difficult to find a woman. And I don't think that's necessarily natural. I think it's because we live in an age where women have unbelievably high standards. And if anything, men have unbelievably low standards, but not such low standards that they will get with a 60-year-old woman. And that's why a 60-year-old woman has to go to these tropical locations to find
Yeah, and
all the
find
way
herself a
all the
prostitute.
way to these tropical locations in order to find a teenage man / boy who's willing to give it up for money, whereas men of all ages, including teenagers, can have trouble finding a woman with low enough standards. I mean, even
Yeah.
average enough standards to pair up with the average 20-year-old or teenage boy. Such I mean, a woman in her 20s, or indeed a teenage woman, or even a woman in her 30s, doesn't have to look for a male prostitute, because as Karen's often said, they can just go up to a man at a bar and whisper some sweet nothings, some dirty somethings in a man's ear, and that's that. They can just go ahead and do that. Whereas men don't have that option, and that's that seems normal to us in this day and age. But let's not forget, this day and age has been ravaged with feminism for the last 100 years, and indeed romantic chivalry for the last 1,000 years.
Yup.
So it's hard to say how much of this is natural, how much of this comes down to the natural libido of men and women. I think men and women have similar libidos. I think they both think about sex all the time, especially if they're not having sex. The younger they are, down to and including teenage years, the more they think about sex. But it's remarkably difficult for men in the West to find sex unless they happen to be millionaires. And it's remarkably easy for women in the West to find sex, even if they happen to be milkmaids or whatever.
Yeah, whatever. By the way, we did get a super chow from Meredith G for $5, and she said HBR Talk 376. Honey for the Badgers. Thanks for the thought-provoking conversation. And speaking of thoughts, so UN Women, not only are they wanting to dictate how marriage works, but also where people how people's agreements on where to live work. So in some cultures, it is normal that when men and women get married, the man already has property. In fact, he's not an eligible bachelor without it. And so when he gets married, his wife is expected to move in with him because he is her provider. And that's been historically traditional for a long time. But in this, they want it set in all nations legislation. They want it legislated that the husband and wife shall by mutual agreement choose their matrimonial regime and place of residence. Which is interesting because if you are in a polygamous marriage, so the husband already has a mansion or palace or other big place of residence, and he's got 3 other wives, and you are wife number 4, do you really get to say, I want you all to move to my village or my town, my community, my city, my province, whatever, so that we can be close to my family? It's quite an interesting question. If they're not going to suggest that monogamy is required, then it's kind of silly to suggest that uh, the the fourth wife gets a say in where the family is going to live. And then obviously, when it is a monogamous relationship, and if the marriage is consensual by both parties, then she is consenting to either move in with him or they've made arrangements otherwise. But nope, they want it legislated as if women somehow don't get that consent. And then they also want married women to be able to keep their maiden name, retain their nationality. So, say, for example, if a Canadian woman came to the United States and married a U.S. man, they want the Canadian woman to remain Canadian, which would really complicate things in a marriage like that in the U.S. But in African nations, this is what they want. They want the woman to be able to determine the nationality of their children, unless the other national legislation uh, basically contradicts it, or it's a national security risk. Like you marry somebody from a warring nation, they can't decide their kids are part of that nation, and they want um, women to have separate property of their own in a marriage. So what they're essentially doing there is saying that they want women to be able to be married on paper and remain unmarried everywhere else. You think about that. Feminism has fought tooth and nail in the West to break down and destroy the institution of marriage, to separate wives from their husbands and fathers from their children, and to ensure that women feel enslaved by marriage rather than in a partnership, being in a partnership. And this seems to be part of that. But
they've fought tooth and nail to reduce men's rights in the event of a marriage, but not the government's stranglehold over how marriage works legally. And I've often been of the opinion that the government should not be involved in marriage, insofar as the government is involved in anything. Like if two people love each other and they want to bring their families together in matrimony, then they should absolutely be able to. But the government shouldn't be involved in it. And in light of my own situation, I'm like, well, I really want to move to the US because my country's fucked. It's going to get taken over by Sharia law any day now. So I really want to move to the US. And if marriage is what it takes, then fuck it. I'll go against all my MGTOW vows and I'll fucking do it. But the fact that any of this is even held hostage by the government in the first place is I like to think it's a way into the country, but it isn't. It's it should never have been a way to keep people out in the first place.
yeah, it's the worst part about it is it's the only way to get to live in the same country as the woman you're going to be with. And it's you have to tell the government, yes, we will make this legal and we'll get you involved in the relationship. So technically, every relationship in the United States and any Western nation that any nation that has legislation that this determines what happens in a marriage and what defines a marriage and so on, they're all in a way polyamorous and all incestuous. It's husband, wife, and Uncle Sam. Although in other countries it's not Uncle Sam, so there you go. But yeah, it is a rotten situation. My husband and I, the only reason that we went with getting married legally was because people treat your relationship like it's not real if you don't get the government involved in it. I care about the church's involvement in it simply because the church family will support the marriage. But the government doesn't do that. In fact, the government kind of facilitates the breakup of the marriage more than it facilitates the unity of the marriage. So I saw the government as a problem and didn't really want to get it involved. But the government doesn't give you much choice. It doesn't really count your relationship. If something happens to your partner and you need to be there for the partner, you don't have any rights in regard to your marital relationship and your responsibilities to your partner if you have not made the government a part of your relationship. So it's a terrible thing. And if you are from a different country than your partner, you don't have the legal right to live in the same country as your partner unless you make the government part of your relationship.
And that's the only
So,
thing the government is supposed to be for, isn't it?
yeah,
I mean, controlling the relationships
controlling the
between
borders.
between people from one country and another country. And
Yeah,
yeah, in many ways that sucks, but in many ways that's what a government is for. That's the only thing a government is for,
yeah.
controlling the
Well,
borders
defending the nation.
and the rights of citizens between one
Yeah,
nation and another. And okay, fine, I guess that's what stops. That is what's supposed to stop the millions of shadow beasts from invading your country, just because they they can force the hand of whatever maidens they can find in another country.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know any easy way through this situation other than having at least a small government. Like I'm not a total fucking anarchist in any of these ways. Like it's important. Like the whole idea of having a national government is to uphold a nation, as opposed to another nation. Um, to keep these nations separate so that they don't get invaded by other nations. But yeah,
So that you and women can't come along and tell you what marriage has to be in your country because of the way they feel about marriage in their countries. Yeah. And of course, everything that we just read, the ultimate goal of it is actually right here in part D of their statement on separation, divorce, and annulment of marriage. In case of separation, divorce, or annulment of marriage, which they're attempting to cause with their stipulations on marriage, women and men shall have the right to an equitable sharing of joint property deriving from the marriage. So, what they really want is women to be able to monopolize a rich man and then divorce him and take half his shit, like they do in the US. That is the end game for UN women. Not making marriage better for men and women, not uh, supporting functional relationships, not helping to prevent abuse or abandonment or neglect or anything like that. Nope. In case of divorce, which they will encourage, she gets half. Half, Eddie. So that was the main thing I wanted to look at tonight, in terms of this, their little thing about marriage. I may come back to more as I go through this, more details of this particular document, but I think you guys get the gist at this point. Notice that they discuss rights that the wife shall have, mostly. Um, Occasionally, they reference mutual agreement when the woman gets to decide if the man has to move. And then, of course, you have equitable division of property that was owned by the husband before the marriage, more likely than not. And they're doing the same thing in Spain. I'm not going to. I don't know if I'm going to try to get into that tonight. I think I might look more at that on another day, because if I remember right, I had to have it go through a translation. So we are going to finally look at the second article that I referenced earlier, 5 or 6 shows ago. How to counter the manosphere's toxic influence. Now remember, the goal in countering the manosphere's toxic influence is to stop us from influencing men, and the men that we influence from influencing governments against the passage of legislation like we just looked at. So they don't want men to stop governments from ensuring that women can marry wealthy men and then divorce them and take half their shit. They want to make sure that women are considered special. They don't have to earn anything. They can just marry into it and then take it with them when they leave.
Yeah, why do such institutions never speak of such a thing as the femisphere? Why is there not considered to be any such thing as this femisphere? Well, it's because the UN is part of the femisphere. It's because the mainstream media is part of the femisphere. It's because world governments are part of the femisphere, and so they're just considered normal. It's much like this illustration that I've been trying to paint since 10 years ago, that the femisphere is the outer mantle of the human species, and the manosphere is this inner part that's considered to be normal, but at the same time considered to be so abnormal as to be toxic. Like, the femisphere is not a thing. It's not considered to be a thing, even though it must be. If there's a manosphere, there must be a femisphere. But it's not just it's not considered a threat. No matter what happens, no matter how deeply into our civilization feminism buries its claws, it's never considered to be a threat to the status quo, because it is the status quo. It's been the status quo, not just for 100 years, but for 1,000 years. And I don't know if that's the top end of the estimation, or if it's the lower end, but it's ever since romantic chivalry has been installed as a part of our civilization, and that is at least 1,000 years.
Interestingly, an example of this is actually the organization we're looking at, UN Women. Did you know that there is no such organization as UN Men?
Of course not. Why would it be? Men have always been in charge. They don't need rights.
Yeah, that's what we're told. Men have always been in charge and they don't need rights. That's why anytime human rights activism takes place in another country where there's starvation, war, poverty, disease, any kind of despotism, where women are being, treated like meat, and men are being treated like dead people because they're getting killed. Then all of the women's organizations rush to make sure that women get the lion's share of resources and protections. So, even in nations that are not what you would necessarily call third world, like India is It sort of fits that second world definition where it has a lot of first world amenities and a lot of first world issues, but it still has third world problems at the same time. And one of those is widespread poverty. And as soon as a system existed to provide through government, um, through people's tax dollars, essentially, to provide food for people who couldn't afford to buy their own food, it was given to the women to control, and to the degree that men can't get help on their own. If a man doesn't have a wife or a mother or a sister or a daughter living in his home, he has no access to this system because only women are allowed to receive this free food. And then they determine they're supposed to distribute it, who gets it. Which, again, the majority of people living without any family support at all in India are men. So they essentially took a problem that it affects both sexes and it affects children, but there are more men who are totally on their own than there are women who are totally on their own. And they went, well, we've got to help those women, completely ignoring the men. Yeah, in the U.S., only 25% of the homeless are women, and if I remember my stats right, only 5% of unsheltered homeless are women. The rest, the 75% and the 95%, are men. And the lion's share of resources are reserved for women, women with children, women without children. The order seems to go women with children, women without children, men with children, men without children. And so men who are alone, men who will often end up, they have a mental illness or they have an addiction, which in its own way is a mental illness. They got nothing. They don't have anybody to take them in. They can't go to shelters because they're considered dangerous, especially if they have an addiction. Like you can't be on a substance and go to shelter. So soup kitchens will even kick you out. So men with real serious issues, they're just on the street until they die, and it's a horribly unfortunate situation for them. And yet, when you see reporting on homelessness, it almost always features the women who are getting the most help, as opposed to the men who need the most help. Right. So yeah, women are the femisphere is the establishment. You're right. So how to counter the manosphere? This is why UN Women wants to counter the manosphere, by the way, because we're a threat to their grift. How to counter the manosphere's toxic influence? What do they think will stop us? What will get rid of us forever? So they say, everybody loses in a world with gender inequality, even the digital world. But in the manosphere, influencers are spreading and profiting from controversial content that fuels misogyny. So everybody loses in a world with gender and inequality, but apparently not when it affects men. It's misogyny when we talk about the fact that sometimes it affects men.
I mean,
Controversial
if you have such a thing as gender,
yeah,
then you necessarily have such a thing as inequality. I mean, gender is this bullshit word it means essentially the same thing as genre. It's not a coincidence that these are similar words. They're the same words. Gender and genre mean the same thing. It's just another word for type. And
yeah.
acknowledging that there are different types of human. it counts as inequality. And yes, it does, because yes, there are different types of human, just like there are different types of genre among anything that you're going to call genre, like different genres of movie or book or whatever. Yes, there are differences between horror and thriller and romance and stuff like this. And yes, that does track onto men and women because men and women like different genres because they are different genders. Like I say, it's whatever the opposite of a tautology is. Gender inequality is gender inequality is a tautology, because in the existence of genders, you necessarily have the existence of inequality. And yeah, we could have a government that doesn't treat men and women differently legally, except in instances where they necessarily have, where there necessarily are differences like pregnancy, and that's why it's so easy for feminists to focus on these differences when it comes to things like pregnancy and abortion and stuff like that, because that necessarily is a difference. But it's harder for them to see the issues that men face because they're less tangible than the things that women face. I mean, if women get pregnant, what do men get? Well, evolution has sorted this out, and indeed society and civilization have sorted this out, because they've sort of figured out that women get pregnant. So what should we do with men to equal out the what women have to deal with in the event of pregnancy? And yet, yes, this is all already been figured out. That constraints should be put on men in the event of being party to a pregnancy. And yeah, that has already happened. Like, if a man is party to a pregnancy, he should be charged. He should be tracked down and forced to to give what he owes to the pregnancy. All these feminists and all these UN women people are sort of acting as though men have never been forced to contribute to the well-being of a child, whereas they have for a long ass time. If you go back as far as prehistoric times, I guess they haven't. But in many ways, they
families
have.
have always done that. Actually, historically, families have tracked down fathers and imposed accountability on them. But if you want a more recent historical example, the Elizabethan Poor Laws introduced the idea that the government will track down the father of a wayward mother.
And it predates governments. For as long as we've had tribes, and we've had tribes for tens of thousands of years. Like, you can't just escape your tribe and go into the wilderness if you're a man who's impregnated a woman and doesn't want to have to deal with that. But that's a rare case, because when a man impregnates a woman, even in the post prehistoric tribal days, he would be, yay, I've got a child. Because men, Homo sapien males, have this cognitive ability, because they have such big brains. They're able to figure out that, because this woman is pregnant, and because I did this thing that we now realize makes her pregnant. They're like, oh, this means my child is involved. And this is where I have to argue with the ghost of Terence McKenna and many other people. Like, the idea that when a man knows a child is his, that's a terrible thing that brings down that can bring the human race into disrepute and despoils and can turn us all in the right direction. No, I completely disagree. When a man knows that a child is his, he will do anything for that child.
Yep.
I mean, this is something that didn't happen in the days before that, when a man had no way of knowing that a child was it, and that goes back a long fucking way, long before we had anything like the human brains we have now. I mean, I think even gorillas and chimpanzees sort of have some perhaps pheromonal sense of knowing which children are theirs. But Homo sapiens has this intellectual way of even allowing men to know which children are theirs. And when they do, they will do anything for that child.
In
And
fact,
they don't need to be forced to do whatever they can for that child. They will do it by default because they have this psychological bonding with that child. Like it can work on its own. You don't need to force them to figure it out using the government. I mean, in some rare cases, in some cases that have been applied with these racist stereotypes or whatever, but I don't think any of these racist stereotypes really apply like anywhere. Like, men love their children. Homo sapien males love their children just as much as female Homo sapiens does. I'm sorry if that's controversial, but I don't think it is. I think
possibly
that
more
this
actually,
this
because
is one this is
you
one of
don't
the
see as many
unique.
men killing their babies as you do women
Well,
killing their babies.
indeed, but maybe that's because they're not afforded to. But yeah, this is one
I
of the
doubt it.
unique. This is one of the unique things about Homo sapiens, that men are just as chemically and neurologically bonded to their children as women are, and we do ourselves a disservice if we deny this. And we've been ravaged with the denial of this uh, biological evolutionary truth, and we should probably get back to that truth.
Yeah. Um, just a note for the chat. We already know that Mike's microphone, the static thing is happening, and there's
Oh
not a lot that can be
shit!
done about it at this
Sorry.
point, unless it is replaced. So we're just gonna have to deal with it.
Sorry, I didn't
And
know.
I think the more that it gets moved around and messed with, the worse that it's gonna sound. So, but in any case, yeah, I mean, when you look at what men do when they parent a child versus what women do, especially in modern sense, because women have a tendency to drop their children off with strangers, to and pay them to watch the child for hours and hours so that they can emulate men in the workplace. Where and women today, as a population, and I know that this is probably similar to violent crime in that the percentage of women who are doing it is smaller, and many of them are repeat offenders. But 3 in 10, so nearly a third of pregnancies that occur today are ended. They end in a elective abortion. That is, it's not a miscarriage, and it's not done because um, the doctor is reducing the number of imminent deaths caused by the pregnancy by one, uh, by saving the mother's life. But yeah, men will work themselves to death to provide for their children, to give them a better life, to make sure that they're able to provide for themselves when they become adults. They'll die in a fire trying to get their children out of the house. They will, they'll protect their whole family. They will live with a woman who treats them like shit, who abuses them, who spends their money before they make it, um, who doesn't even have sex with them anymore. as long as they can take care of their children. And men are the sex that has had to fight for their custodial rights for the last 100 years. Um, and men have had to fight not only uh, weird preconceived notions like the idea that God made women parents but not men, which was a feminist idea. Carolyn Norton, who wrote the can't think of what it was called. It had the word infants in it with a E, something of Infants Act. But it's essentially it was the tender years doctrine, and the legislators in the UK bought that, and then it being English common law, it bled over into U.S. law, and the U.S. kind of did the same thing. That women would get primary custody and divorce up till like the age of 7, and unless there was some really weird extenuating circumstance. And ever since then, men had to first fight for joint custody, and then shared parenting, and eventually equally shared parenting. And every step of the way, feminist groups fought against it. Every step of the way, feminists have opposed fathers taking care of their children. Men have fought for the right to mentor and protect their children. So clearly you have a difference there. Women fought for the right to kill their babies, and men fought for the right to mentor and protect their children, to love and care and nurture for their children, and not just be walking wallets. Which is, again, one of the reasons why the femisphere fears us. Because we notice things like that, and we point out these laws are important. They're good for children, they're good for fathers, and despite many mothers' vehement protests, they are good for mothers. There are benefits to the mother when the father is involved. Women who are not raising their children by themselves live longer. Women who have an involved father raising their children with them are happier. They show less signs of stress. Because I shouldn't say they. My husband and me raised our kids together. We were a team, and for me that was a very fun time. Even with the stress of having the second family, an ex-wife, and child support bills to pay and all that. Just having that partnership and the teamwork and the family being together and everything, that meant a lot. And it does change your whole life. It does make your whole life better. And these women will cut their nose off to spite their face, and they will con other women into doing the same thing, thinking it's more important to get half the marital property all to yourself without the husband than it is to have his partnership in raising your children. It's insane. So they go on. They claim that we promote unhealthy definitions of masculinity and normalize violence against women and girls. Right. So if you look at the men's rights movement, the most vocal aspects of our participation in the discussion on intimate partner and sexual violence have all been about ways to reduce that type of violence, and the fact that female violence is a huge contributing factor to family violence. So we don't advocate that violence be met with violence. We advocate that violence be met with accountability. That when women and girls in relationships with men or boys engage in violence against their partner, their heterosexual partner, that they should be just as accountable as a partner of a woman or a girl is when they engage in violence against their female partner. And that's it. That's all we want. Right? We want to see that men should have some recourse if they are abused. Boys should have some recourse if they are abused. And they should be able to get out of the relationship, or get the same stipulation that their partner has to go through abuser therapy and learn to not handle conflict by engaging in abuse, just like a man, because it's just as bad when she does it. It's just as damaging for the children when she does it. And it can be just as dangerous, especially if she chooses to use a weapon, or if she uses lies and gets him jailed for things that he didn't do. So yeah, they're terrified that that might actually happen, and women might not be able to um, manipulate the public into giving them lots of money to fight the evil men while pretending that women are never violent.
And I'd like to know where they draw these boundaries as to where the manosphere ends and begins. I'd like them to give me some examples, and when they do, I wonder how many of those examples I can point to, and how they address the immigration problem, because so many of these content creators that I listen to, when they talk about immigration, will frame it principally, if not entirely, as to how much of a threat it is against, quote unquote, our women and girls.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just our women and girls to whom these immigrants pose a threat, because they're the only people being raped, they're the only people being endangered. I don't want to name any names, but y'all can probably figure out who I'm talking. You can probably figure out many examples of who I'm talking about, because there are so many of them. Like when it comes down to an otherwise neutral topic, they would be like, well, the problem with these immigrants is they're all men, they're all fighting age men, and they're all graping and essaying our women and girls, completely leaving out that they're also graping and essaying our boys and assaulting and murdering our men. But that doesn't seem to matter to the vast majority of what these cunts are calling the manosphere. The vast majority of what they call the manosphere is still very much laser focused on how to demonize the men of other nations, so as to keep in their minds the fact that the only victims are the women and girls of our own nation. And yeah, this is just what happens when other nations are only interested in exiling the men of their nation, because they're perfectly happy to subsidize the women and girls of their own nation. They're like, no, please don't leave, girls and women of our nation. We need you so as to keep our nation going. But you other men, you 3/4 of men who don't get wives because of our polygamous setup, you could all fuck off. You can all get shipped off to those countries where the government will give you a free life for nothing, and then when they arrive here, our so-called manosphere will be like, look at all these men, we fucking hate these men, look at what a threat they pose to our women and girls, but they're also murdering the men. Doesn't fucking matter. Think of the women and the girls. And I'm like, and here's UN women going, the manosphere is prioritizing men over women, boys over girls. bro, if only you knew how bad things really were. Like, it's the same. It's the same not just across the West, but in the Middle East and across the East. Like, it's the same problem everywhere. We're trying to get rid of the men we don't want, and pamper and prioritize all women and girls, even the women and girls from other nations. Like, come ye, come all, as long as you're female. Like, we will protect you from the evil men across the oceans and across the land. I'm fucking
Yeah,
sick
and
of it, man. Like, if
the worst thing about that is that they're definitely going to come and end up on welfare
of course,
because they can, right? Whereas the single males that show up, they may be able to get temporary assistance for a while, but because they are single males, they don't have children. In a lot of countries, in a lot of Western nations, your welfare system, whatever it's called, your public assistance, your social safety net, usually requires recipients to be parents with children. And so those men will have a short amount of time where their situation is better, and then suddenly they're dropped like a rock from that system. And at the same time, they're treated like a liability by employers and by anybody that might be a colleague if they are seeking work. And what happens then? They end up in trouble with the law. And when you have that combination, and then you also have things like people who are part of terrorist organizations, whether it's ISIS or drug cartels or mafias, gangs, whatever you want to point out in countries with more more poverty situations and less rule of law in their nation, then you get this mix of criminal underworld and people with no jobs that can't support themselves and can't get help from the government because they have no children and they're male, and so there's nothing specifically for them. What are they going to do? What pathway is available for them to take? Any good ones, or are we setting ourselves up for a huge homeless population that's going to die off, or a huge criminal population that's desperate? It's all a very bad idea. And in the end, the men involved are generally speaking victims of something. Um, Human beings do not grow up to be insanely violent if they are not raised in an environment where they learn to be violent. They grow up to be um, maybe more contentious if they have that natural personality, but they learn more socially acceptable ways or more effective ways of interacting with other people and getting what they want, even if they're assholes, than to use violence that will get them jailed or killed someday if they grow up in any kind of healthy home environment. It's generally speaking only people who grow up in an environment where a family member is abusive, or they're in a gang-ridden neighborhood where violence is all around them, or they're in a war-torn area where violence is all around them, or some combination thereof, that end up like the MS-13 members that you see in the news getting deported, and the newscaster is telling you their long laundry list of violent crimes that they committed while they were here before the government finally kicked them out of the country. Like, those guys they weren't born that way, right? And not that makes us responsible for them, but it is always a situation in which a complete lack of compassion and consideration for the boy created the man that everybody sees as a monster. Yeah, and unfortunately, until we start holding our government accountable for the conditions that it's creating in other countries that lead to this, and rather than demanding that they let people in and just let them run free, when this is what they're importing, and this is what they're setting them up for, this is going to continue. So,
And this is probably why empires fall, by the way. This is probably why we've been in this constant cycle of empires rising and then empires falling. Because as empires rise, they get more and more decadent. They get more and more self-assured, and they find themselves consumed with issues that don't matter, like how we can make life better for women.
yeah. And
And
eventually you get to a situation where there's no choice but to recognize that if you don't make life better for men, there won't be life anymore.
yeah, and the bigger the empire, the larger the fall. And this appears to be what we're living through right now. Because effectively we have the biggest empire ever because we have binding forces between nations, such as the UN. I know that doesn't do much, all in all, but empires don't just extend to country boundaries. We have all kinds of country binding forces like the UN and like the WEF and like NATO and all this such, and yeah, we have empires that span continents at this point, and they've become so decadent, so self-assured, and so lazy, largely due to this technocratic easing of all of our hardships. We don't have very few of the hardships that we've had over the years, and so we can focus our attention on needless, pointless things, like how we can micromanage, how much easier we can make it for the people that we fundamentally care about, namely women and children, especially women, because they can actually advocate for their own self-interest in ways that children cannot. Like we are sort of designed to encourage the strong to protect the weak, and in the case of men, that means, well, we're clearly the strongest people in the world, so we have to focus all our efforts on protecting those weaker than us. Whereas with women, they're like, okay, I guess we are stronger than children, but we're weaker than men, and so they hold this middle ground where they can claim all the rights for themselves because they're weaker than men, but they can just forego, they can just ignore all of this responsibility that they have over children, because they can focus on how much they're weaker than men. and yeah, this is how this happens, because women are the middle ground between men and children, and so they can get all the advantages of being weak and all the advantages of being strong over whoever it may be. And so, yeah, this is what I'm saying. This is probably, I don't have much historical evidence for this, but this is probably why so many empires collapse, because they focus on the human beings who can advocate for their strength and weakness at the same time, namely women. And this cycle of empires rising and falling is going to keep happening until we can acknowledge that women are in fact strong, even in relation to men. That women have strengths with which they can dominate men. Now, I know that's something that a manospherite like me would say, but once you understand evolutionary psychology, it becomes fairly obvious. Yes, women have strengths that can dominate men. And no, they're not physical strengths. They are psychological strengths, because we are a very cerebral species that is driven by our brains more than our muscles. I mean, that's one of the most unusual things about Homo sapiens, that we have such huge brains. Evolution has dealt us huge brains that can override whatever strength we might have. And I don't mean brains just in a mental sense, in an intellectual sense. I mean in an emotional sense. Yes, men have emotions. Sorry, feminists, it's true. Men are very much driven by their emotions, and one of their strongest emotions is how much we love women, and how much we will override everything else in our brain in order to give women everything they want. It's unfortunate. It's it's the hand evolution has dealt us, and it's up to us to overcome these irrational gynocentric tendencies. I'm not saying gynocentrism is necessarily ingrained in us, but it's a shortfall that it's very easy for us to fall into if we can't work our way out of it intellectually. And that's what we're trying to do here at Honey Badger Radio. We're trying to do in many aspects of this here manosphere. We're trying to say, like, yes, I know we're sort of evolutionary built to deal with this in some ways, but we're also blessed with this sense of logic and rationality. And I know that's often painted as the enemy, and yes, in many ways it is, but it can be used to our advantage if we can just realize that this instinct we have to protect the weak at the expense of the strong is not necessarily the be all and the end all. Sometimes the strong deserve to be thought of. The strong deserve to be protected and preserved just as much as the weak, arguably more. I mean, like, if it's talking,
because the weak can't survive
evolution
without the strong.
in evolutionary terms, yeah, like we have the strong ought to be prioritized over the weak, if only in pragmatic terms. It can go either way. We shouldn't necessarily destroy the weak just because they're weak, but we certainly shouldn't destroy the strong just because they're strong. That's even more retarded.
In fact, historically, women were encouraged to have at least some sort of trigger discipline when it comes to firing off the prioritize me because I'm weaker gun. And historically, women were also expected to use what strengths they did have to support their protectors and their providers. It was a reciprocal relationship, and women relied on men's strengths, and men relied on women's strengths. And today, women have declared that having to reciprocate for the reliance that they have on men is oppression, and therefore they shouldn't have to do it. No reciprocation. And that's essentially the situation we're in now. So the femisphere is complaining that men have rejected the deal. No, we don't want to protect, provide, and love and nurture with no reciprocation, only to be punished for it in the end. We don't like that deal, right? The femisphere says, "How dare you? How very dare you? How dare you reject this excellent deal that gives us everything we want? What's wrong with you? Don't you love women? Don't you respect women?" That's essentially what this article is, and that's where we are now. The idea that we promote unhealthy definitions of masculinity. Feminism has promoted the idea that the things that have gotten men through hard times, the ability to reserve being emotional for when it is safe to be emotional, and to be outwardly stoic when it is necessary to do so in order to get shit done, and create a safer situation for being emotional, is apparently misogyny. And they really think that if men don't cry the way that women cry, and as often as women cry, and for the same reasons that women cry, in other words, when bad things happen to women, then there's something wrong with men. And they advocate this idea that men should be allowed to express their emotions, and they should be allowed to cry and talk about their problems, and give their grievances and complaints, in other words, right? But what does the rest of this article say about men who air their grievances and complaints? Or, women who listen when men air their grievances and complaints? Well, that's normalizing violence against women and girls. That's spreading misogyny. That's the manosphere. How very dare we allow men to air grievances and complaints that are not feminist approved? And what do, feminists, when you say that men should be allowed to talk about their problems, but the problems they talk about are you? So here they say, they're talking about the article that we read the first time, and that we are a real world threat. The manosphere is a real world threat. We're a threat, guys. And then it goes on to describe who we are. So who are we? It says mental health impacts on boys and men. The manosphere's unrealistic definitions of manhood can promote anxiety, self-harm, and risky behaviors in young men who feel pressured to be more manly. So there you go. Feminists don't want men to be able to express themselves. They don't want men to be able to form their own identities. They want men to be feminized. Whereas the men's rights movement has supported men who are gay, men who are straight, men who are rugged, men who are nerdy, men who are in great shape, men who are fat, men who are able-bodied and working, men who are disabled. Right? It's not just one type of man. But feminists only support men if they are feminized. If they are not feminized, they're not real men to feminists, because they don't worship women enough. And their example isn't from the men's rights movement. It's from the incel community. Looksmaxing. Looksmaxing communities subject men's photos to brutal commentary, which maybe they do. But the fact is, they have a reason, and that is women will reject men based on looks, and they will reject men harshly and cruelly. They will not only say, I'm not interested, but get away from me, you creep. And that's not misandry. That's completely harmless. They're allowed to do that, right? Women who hear complaints about that kind of behavior say that you're making excuses for the creep. But if the so-called creep goes to a community that is trying to show him how to be more attractive, and they suggest your eyebrows, need to be divided into 2 eyebrows and not one going across the middle, or you have to shower every day, not just when you feel like it, or you look like shit with long hair, cut your hair, or you look like shit with short hair, grow it out, or anything like that. From things that you can change easily to you need plastic surgery. And suddenly it's bad. The same thing that girls do and women do when approached by these men is bad when the men say it to each other. But it's not bad when women say it. You see how that goes?
There's a lot has been loaded into this adverb, manly.
Yeah.
Like they haven't explained what they mean by manly. I think what they mean is looking like a man. And pardon me for being perhaps controversial, but what women generally find attractive is manly. And again, they haven't explained what this means, and presumably they don't have to, because they've been so buried in this idea that there shouldn't be a difference between a man and a woman, other than men and women should both advocate for women and only women. And if that means men becoming women, or becoming as aesthetically womanly as possible, then that's absolutely fine. Again, this is UN Women. They have no problem with women being womanly, and they have no problem with men being womanly. That's what I think they mean. Everyone should be womanly. That's why they have a UN Women and no UN Men. It's no problem that women are being encouraged to be womanly, because their idea of womanly is just being a woman, just having a vagina, just presenting as a woman, even if that means being a useless fat bloater with blue hair. They're still womanly, so that still counts. But this idea that men should be strong, oh heavens no, that's toxic. Men should not be strong. It's not as though women are attracted to strong men. Lord heavens to Betsy, no. Why would women ever be attracted to a strong man? And I mean, whenever anyone pictures in their head what manly might mean, it's invariably strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's men are expected to be
quite frequently. Yeah,
men are
some type of strength.
expected to be strong, whether it be physically strong or aesthetically presenting strength, or psychologically or mentally strong. And pardon me, but I think if anything, women should be expected to be more man. I mean, they should expect it to be strong too. Everyone should be expected to be strong. Surely, I mean, strong is better than weak.
Yeah, there was a time.
No matter how femininely you're defining strength, it's still strength. I mean, y'all are obsessed with this strong woman stereotype, and for any attribute you can attribute to a strong woman is something that can also be attributed to a strong man, right? It's being it's having the courage of your convictions, stuff like that. It means being confident and secure in whatever you happen to be, whatever form God happens to have given you, or whatever. Like that's what they mean by manly. Like they just they don't it's toxic when this when this type is applied to men. They want men to be weak. They want men to be weak and affectable and malleable, right? They don't
Right.
want men.
That's the
They don't
thing.
want men to be strong. They want women to be strong, and they want men to melt in the presence of women, because that's their idea of what men should be.
They want men to be controllable by women. That is what they want. They want men to do for women, to be dedicated to women, to prioritize women over themselves. And that's the only stoicism they're allowed to have, is to prioritize women over themselves. They can't be stoic to achieve something that is their goal for themselves, but only to achieve something that is to meet the needs of a woman. And they want men to be slaves, essentially. Workhorses, financiers, um, sugar daddies, right? But not equal partners. And in terms of manly, like if you ask a feminist what constitutes manly, in the end, she will describe a protector and supporter of women.
Ask a
Right?
woman to describe a good man and watch her describe a slave.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who quoted that first, but it's perfect. That's exactly what it is.
And I look at it a totally different way. Like I think about my dad and my grandpa, and both of them had, aspects of ruggedness. My dad was a big man, and he was very strong. And my grandpa was an average sized man, but he was a boxer and a hunter and that kind of stuff. He was a welder. But one of the most manly things each of them did, they did for themselves. And, they shared them with the people around them, but it was an area of interest, each of them, that was creative interest, that wouldn't necessarily be considered masculine per se. And in Grandpa's case, some people considered it feminine. Grandpa grew roses. My hunting, welding, boxing grandpa grew roses. And he was an expert, absolute expert, because he'd been a farmer. So he grew things for a living before he grew roses. So when he grew roses, he threw himself into that the same way that he threw himself into into growing, corn and beans and potatoes and carrots and stuff, and animals. And he competed, and it was great. And I'm allergic to roses. I didn't get to get up close to them, but I can be outdoors in a yard where there are roses in the yard, and it's not a problem. So it was neat for me because I got to see all kinds of beautiful different breeds of these beautiful flowers. And then when I wanted to grow my own vegetables, Grandpa was right there, giving me advice. He knew exactly what to tell me to do, and I had an expert right at my fingertips. My dad was the same way with music. He played by ear. He didn't learn to read notes, but all he had to do was hear it once. He played all of the pop music from his youth, and he played a lot of the pop music from my youth on piano. And eventually we got synthesizer keyboards, and he played on those as well. And it was always great being at home and listening to my dad play. When I was a little kid, sometimes I would just spend hours sitting in the room with my dad playing the piano and listening to him. And I didn't have to be doing anything else. I was just enjoying the music. Um, and it's not particularly a gendered thing, music. People, both sexes do it. But again, like with my grandpa and his roses, my dad had that down to a science, to the degree that when he got synthesizer keyboards, he threw himself into all of the programming you can do with a keyboard, and all of the different ways in which you can try out, let me try making this country song reggae and see how it sounds, and stuff like that. He explored the keyboard, the synthesizer keyboard, all the different instruments and everything, and and just was incredibly masculine about his exploration of music. Both of them had that. Grandpa was very masculine about his exploration of growing roses. And so, this idea that masculine expression can't be rugged and still refined and still include emotional expression and self-interest and things that are therapeutic for the individual. Garden away your stress, play away your stress on your musical instrument. Feminists are full of shit when they say that it's abnormal for men to be able to do different things besides be this stereotype of the stoic, rugged, mountain man or whatever, and nothing else. They paint men as more one-dimensional than any other group of people paints them, and then project that onto other people. You're treating men like they're one-dimensional because you don't want them feminized. No, we don't want men's freedom to express their masculinity in their own personal idiom, to quote Monty Python, taken away from them by some gaggle of gossiping geese who have to make up bullshit about what makes them men.
Yeah, they don't want men to be more emotional. They want them to be less intellectual. They want them to be less physical. They want to strip men away from all of these elements and leave them nothing but the emotional. And then when men express their emotions, they go, well, you're just being emotional and your emotions don't count because you're not oppressed like we are.
Yep.
And they want to do the same thing to women, because women can also be highly intellectual and highly physical, perfectly capable of these things, maybe less evolutionarily primed for these things. But yeah, they want the same thing for women as they want for men. They want to strip them of every objective quality that they can possibly have and leave them with the sheer subjectivity of emotions, so that they can either dismiss or prioritize these emotions depending on what subject to which these emotions pertain. And it's usually along political lines. if you're emotionally advocating for the left wing, then you're a perfectly good person, be you female. But if you're emotionally supporting the right wing, fuck you. You're just being emotional, and your emotions don't count. Facts do care about your feelings as long as they pertain to the political direction we want you to take. And why it is that women prefer the left-wing direction is up for debate. I don't quite know why that is. I think it's probably because they've been manipulated in that direction by certain forces in the left wing. And then we get back into the subject of what communism has done to us in the last 150 years. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and if women have this issue in general of preferring to feel secure over the freedom to make themselves actually secure. It's like a cat with a cardboard box, right? Cats will, if it fits, they sits, right? They'll hide in a cardboard box because it feels safe inside the box. It feels like nothing can come at them from any direction except one. And anyone who's claustrophobic would think of it exactly the opposite way. I have only one direction that I can escape if something bad happens in here, right? I've got family that's claustrophobic, so I've kind of heard plenty about what that's like. But imagine, you have a cat in a situation where there is something truly dangerous, like say a coyote, and the only box around is the box from a 12 pack of sodas, of pop. I'm from Ohio, it's pop, but for everybody else, sodas, um, carbonated beverages in 12-ounce cans, uh, two rows of six. And so the cat gets in there, right? The cardboard box is very thin. One bite, and the coyote is through it, and the cat is dead. It wasn't safe, but it would still go in there because it would feel safe. It would still hide in a place like that. And the problem is women will do that, even though a woman should be logically able to recognize when they are substituting the illusion of safety and security for the reality. And for instance, the idea that we support the dumbest choices that women can make, screwing around like a $3 whore, and then, oh gosh, now I'm an unwed mother, and how am I going to support this child? Hey, Uncle Sam, can I have some money? Instead of suggesting that we teach girls as they are growing up to be very careful and avoid that circumstance so that they never have to deal with it. They never have to ask for that help, and they never have to try to avoid asking for that help by working harder. And because instead they planned for their adult life as they were maturing, right? And we can't suggest that without having feminists get all hateful about it. Oh, that's misogynistic. You're slut shaming. There's no shame in this discussion. This isn't about morals. This is about practicality. The smart thing to have your daughter do growing up is learn about the consequences of careless liaisons, the hygienic issue involved in indiscriminate sex, the emotional hygienic issue, because there are brain chemistry issues that happen when you have sex with a bunch of different people, and that's there's brain issues for women and there's brain issues for men, in that it's not good for either sex, to just have sex with a bunch of people and then disconnect each time and go to the next person. It's very unhealthy. It's mentally unhealthy, and it's physically unhealthy. It doesn't have anything to do with shame. It has to do with you're not protecting your body against the invasion of microbes that can hurt you, and you're not protecting your mind against manipulation that nobody may be deliberately doing to you, but you're still going to experience it. And we're in a situation today where we can't talk about that stuff without feminists politicizing it, right? The most practical thing you can raise your daughter to do is remain a virgin until she gets married, get a job when she's in high school, start socking money away into a dowry account, and have enough for a down payment for a house when she decides to get married. And if she decides to uh, have any kind of professional career before she gets married, to minimize as much as possible how much money she spends on college. the most practical thing she can do is go into that marriage with a nest egg in tow, so that when she decides to have children, the burden is not all on her husband in terms of financial support. And if they decide that, she wants to stay home, or he wants to stay home with the kids for a period of time after they're born, they'll be in a financial position to do that. But unfortunately, we talk about stuff like that. It becomes, why is that the woman's responsibility? Women should earn just as much as men do, but men have to have more money so they can provide for women's choices. Unrealistic. And women will hold these contradictions in their heads with no concern that they are mutually incompatible, right? Mutually exclusive from each other. He can't have more money than you if you're earning the same amount. And your earnings can never be unnecessary. You can't take time off to have your baby and stay home with the child if your earnings are just as important to the finances of the home as your husband's are, unless you come in with a dowry, a nest egg. And as soon as women are confronted with stuff like that, they have the shutoff switch. Misogyny. You hate women. You must not have any friends. Nobody likes you. How dare you talk about things that way? Well, you can't get laid. That's the problem, right? But they can't consider the ideas because they don't feel safe considering your own accountability, your own responsibility, not having someone else to fall back on and rely on for your own welfare up until a certain point doesn't feel safe unless you think all the way through to the recognition that if you are accountable for yourself and you are responsible for yourself, that's freedom. And you're not always under somebody else's control because you're not always dependent on somebody else. And men live with that their whole lives. They start living with that before they're adults. So it doesn't necessarily come naturally, but it feels natural to a degree if you do that your whole life. But if you never have to, and you're never encouraged to, and you never learn to, and you get to adulthood legally, at least, without ever reaching that level of adulthood mentally, you have no context by which to understand it. And it looks terrifying. Oh my gosh, I might someday be on my own. What am I going to do if I don't have a safety net? And so what do women do? They look at what politicians are offering. What are we going to do for women? What safety nets are we going to promise to women? And they pick the politicians that promise the most attractive, softest looking safety nets. And they vote for those guys. And that's how we end up with socialist and communist leaders in charge of our countries. And high taxes and more and more dysfunction, social dysfunction, and even law-breaking criminality over time in our country because women trust safety nets more than they trust themselves. Until we can change that, and that's a big change to make because there's a lot of history of women having that attitude. Until we can change that, everything else that we're dealing with will not improve. Men can't rescue women from that. Women's attitude actually has to change. That's going to be the hardest thing to do. And we are influencing more and more women's attitude to change. There are more women speaking up now. There are more women openly rejecting feminism. There are more women talking openly about the importance of dedication to your husband and reciprocal partnerships and so on. Not necessarily on a left right basis, but on an individual basis. And that's probably what has them the most scared. The real reason that UN women and other feminist groups hate the manosphere, because their income, their political power, their influence very solidly relies on women's addiction to safety nets.
And
And if
they're
women
kind of
overcome that addiction, these people are fucked.
and they're kind of telling on themselves by testing along the lines of no kings, even
Yeah.
in countries where there's no threat of a king ever becoming apparent. But what women really need right now, king. After centuries of democracy, of women uh, uh, bending the knee to governments, to big daddy government, this abstract machine that's going to give them all these gibs at the expense of men. And let's be perfectly honest, this is what has caused all of this. The replacement of the, not just alpha male, but the male in general, the head of a family, the head of any corporation, the head of any private enterprise, the replacement of that with this entirely artificial mob boss that we call the government. That has what not necessarily caused this. I mean, it's been caused by romantic chivalry again since 1,000 years ago, since before even a government existed. That was the precursor to government. But yeah, the fact that what they're protesting against is kings, even in the event that kings haven't existed for, they're sort of showing their ass. They're showing the behind of what they're protesting rather than the front of what they're protesting. Deep down, I mean, I say they don't know, but when I say they, I don't just mean women. I mean this this mass of people kneeling before government. They what people protest against is very often an indication of what they know they really need. And I know that could bite me on the ass having said that. But yes, what you need is a king, because you really want kings. Just like this meme about how we call how we compliment people by calling them queens, and how we compliment people by calling them kings. It's because that's what's best for humanity. And not that we should give absolute power to kings. And no, we shouldn't. In the same way, we shouldn't give absolute power to government. But given that we've given how much power we've given to governments over the centuries, they've ended up with absolute power, far more absolute power than has ever been given to kings.
I think that's actually the biggest part of the problem. Women, more than anything, they don't want it, but they need total societal collapse in order in order to make them grow at this point. And it's hopefully something that doesn't actually happen. And hopefully another way for women to grow and evolve is found, because total societal collapse would hurt a lot, not just for one group of people. Everybody would suffer.
And I'm
But
not
the
talking
truth
about.
is that, women, what women are clamoring for versus what women need, like the gap between those two conditions is so wide you can't see one from if you're standing on the other. And yeah, women might be calling for a king. Women might be begging for big daddy government to be personified by a big daddy, but it's not the best thing that could happen. Having an amount of power, political power, that such as government, consolidated to one individual like that is even worse than having a representative republic with voters. It's it would be better to have almost no government at all or no government at all than to have either one. And unfortunately, I think most women would freak the fuck out if we started going in that direction because
No,
there would be no safety nets.
I'm not talking about total societal collapse. There was
No,
this
I
old
am.
there was this old Joe Rogan joke about if you had a sandwich made of 90% shit and 10% ham, would you be prepared to call that a ham sandwich? And I'm like, the society we have now is 99% ham with 1% of shit on top of that. And I'm just talking about removing the 1% of shit. That is feasible, especially if the shit is merely sprinkled on top of the slice of bread that is on top of that. I'm talking about shave off the shit. In fact, remove the top slice of bread onto which the shit has been sprinkled, and put a fresh slice of bread on top of that. And that's not necessarily regress. I mean, I suppose it is, but you've still got the ham sandwich underneath it. You've still got the fresh slice of bread on the bottom and all that delicious ham in the middle. Just remove the top slice of bread that's been infected with all the human shit and put a different slice of bread on top of it. The one with no shit on top of it. I mean, I don't know if you can call that regress or progress. I don't know if you call it woke left or woke right. But
I'm just wondering if the cook that was handling this shitty ham sandwich washed his or her hands, because otherwise it won't matter. The whole sandwich is contaminated, and you're
we
going to
can
get
figure that
diarrhea
out too.
fever.
We can make that contingency too.
There we go. But I just can't with the idea of there being a monarchy. I think that's just it takes away a certain amount of accountability because the individual, especially in modern terms, where fighting off the government, like the way that the revolutions of the past happened, those avenues are not as available today as they were. And the most available avenue today is to have a system like Trump's trying to create in the US where we have elections that are free from being manipulated, at least in terms of putting votes in that aren't real and or aren't legal. I
Well,
think
it's certainly
I think that's better than if you end up with somebody that maybe the public isn't seeing any of their interests served by your government, that you can't replace that individual because their heir has a God-given right to rule the country next. It just does. It doesn't. I'm not. The
well, I
reason that early Americans fled that type of system was because it always results ultimately in problems and often in despotism. In
well,
like
it
yeah,
certainly hasn't worked out for the UK because we've had a king for this whole time, and the UK is a fucking hellscape at this point.
yep,
and the existence of a monarch hasn't helped us. The fact that we are technically a constitutional monarchy hasn't helped us because we don't really have a constitution. Certainly not like you'll have in the US. We have the Magna Carta, and that's as close as we can really point to in terms of a constitution. But that's not really our constitution. That's just an element of what I guess we're calling our constitution. But the fact that the Prime Minister in Britain has to kneel before the King is important, because it is supposed to hold them back. It is supposed to give them humility before something greater than the government.
Well,
And
unfortunately, it is not stopped them from
no,
wrecking the country.
no, largely because we've been a vassal state of the US ever since
Yeah.
and we've had to do whatever the US tells them ever since the war, and the fact that the US has been doing nothing but whatever the government tells it since then. I mean, I'm just
Well, and the
imagining.
U.S. has actually been, to a degree, the vassal state of another country.
Oh, well, we can't talk about that now, can we?
Yes, Richard, I have noticed that John Doe is absent.
That's only been since 1948.
Right.
If you're talking about the state, I think it's
right.
But imagine if George Washington was made the king. I know this would change so much of history, because that doesn't mean you wouldn't be without a government. You'd be much like the UK, a constitutional monarchy with George Washington.
The problem is the strength of the country. The strength of the country came from the history we did have. The country's power came from the history that we did have. And
well, you never know, though, do you?
Well, yeah, we do, because the country came from the countries that our ancestors fled. My ancestors fled from several countries, and most of them are in the European Union now. So, in my opinion, I think the parliamentary system that doesn't involve a king has been shown to be at least somewhat superior, at least in terms of strengthening a country. Now, once we got to the point where, honestly, the downfall of this country wasn't voting, and it wasn't the parliamentary system. It was when women began voting, because women, instead of voting in the interests of their homes and their communities, voted for safety nets.
Well, you know how you could develop a counterpoint to that eventuality? Having some kind of king who can go, no, fuck you, women.
It doesn't work that way, because you had a king.
No.
And women still got the right to vote in your country. In fact, they had the right to vote, and then they lost it for only a little while, and they threw a massive wild temper tantrum, thus increasing the amount of time it took for their parliament to give it back. But eventually they did.
This is much
and
like...
again, you still have, like, when it was only men voting, you had a much more practical response to what government was doing and what it was supposed to be doing. We didn't have a constantly escalating, massive growing system of overspending and building debt, until women started voting for social safety nets and for more and more regulation. Hell, we didn't need any type of federalized police force until women pushed for the government to control what people drank. And then we got organized crime, and then we ended up with a federalized police force because of that. It was a direct result The FBI and the whole system of federalizing law enforcement came into existence to control a type of crime that only happened in the United States because women tried to micromanage people's choices, lifestyle choices, right? And a king didn't prevent that in the UK. A king didn't prevent that in France. King didn't prevent that in Spain. Um, you still ended up with that same situation of women trying to micromanage people's choices and confiscate people's resources for feminine interests. So there will never be a situation where, as long as women are allowed the same style of say in politics that men have, and the same influence, social influence that women have at the same time, there will never be a type of government that can rein them in.
The best we can get is a free market. And in theory, politics can work in the same way as a free market. As long as there is competition between entities, those various entities will have to compromise amongst each other based on what the majority of people want. And this is why it's important to have this back and forth between the government and the monarchy. And this is something we don't have in the UK. We haven't had it for a while. The government won the government has cornered that market. Like the monarchy has no power anymore. They do technically have the king can, or indeed the queen previously, the king can turn up in Parliament and say, no, I hereby veto this bill, but he's never going to do that. Because if he did, the monarchy would be abolished overnight. And that's the problem. The point is you need a back and forth so that you have the competition that represents the free market.
That's the separation of powers.
Yeah,
we have the legislative branch that is it's one power. We have the executive branch that's the second power, and then we have the judicial branch that is a third power, and each has some degree of override capability for the other two. And what's interesting, Congress can still override the president too. You have to have more votes. It takes a bigger effort, but they can do it. And if the courts determine a law to be unconstitutional, the legislators can look at what were the reasons they gave and try to find workarounds to have the law do what they want and still have it be constitutional. And of course, you have the Constitution itself laying out the rights that are protected for citizens and placing limitations on and what the government can do and determining what the government's roles are. And with that document, all three of the branches being beholden to it, that is supposed to act as sort of the fourth check, the fourth balance. And it's worked for all these years. The only issue that we've had, and I'm still going to lay it at the feet of women, is that women don't think all the way through when they look at those social safety nets to the other side of it, where they are voting for dependence and they are voting for being controlled.
Agreed.
As a result of that. And there's no form of government that you can come up with that undoes that. The attitude itself, the failure to think ahead and think through, has to change. And now there is one way that men can fix this, but it's a generational fix. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Every father that has the access and ability to raise his daughter should raise his daughter to think better, think all the way through, and not just want safety nets. And there's little things that a guy, like when I was a kid, I had 2 different attitudes from my parents about my tendency to pick up bugs, like my brother did. My dad thought it was cute, and so he helped me find interesting bugs that weren't going to bite me, and encouraged me to be tough about the bugs that did bite. My mom warned me that the bugs would bite. And it was one of the most feminine things she ever did. Oh my gosh, they bite! One day I was playing with a spider, and it was trapped in a corner. I was a little kid, so I didn't realize how mean this was at the time. But it was trapped in the corner, and it would start running out of the corner, and I would flick it with my finger, and it would roll into a ball and roll back into the corner, and I would try to get out another way. And which as an adult, my first response would be to go back and tell that kid, "Don't do that. That's mean. You might hurt the bug." But my mom, "Oh, hand do they bite?" She was near panicked because she was allergic to spider bites. So she didn't know if I would be or not. I'm not. It's one of the few things I'm not allergic to. But scared the crap out of me. She about had to peel me off the ceiling with a spatula. Right? Where my dad, taught me how funny it is to let a daddy longleg, a huntsman spider, not the Australian kind, crawl up your arm. They can't bite. They can't do anything. They're just these weird little leggy, creatures. And to pick up and carry around crickets and go fishing with them and bait my own hook and that kind of stuff. It's better to encourage your daughters to have that the guts to explore their environment and to maybe care about their impact on it. Like, don't hurt the spider. That's mean. Don't be mean to things just for the sake of having some kind of fun. But it's perfectly acceptable to get a good close look at it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you shouldn't be too scared. Look how little it is. And again, not in Australia, clearly. But instead, a lot of times we coddle little girls. Little girls get taught that it's okay to be delicate and fragile and scared of everything. And when they hit the first grade, 6-7-year-old age, and they start tattling on everybody for everything, it's encouraged instead of discouraged. And handle it. And anytime that it's not something that an adult should handle, this person is breaking this minor rule in the classroom. Well, nobody likes a tattletale, right? That should be the answer most of the time. But instead, we teach little girls from the time they're toddlers that they should be seeking safety nets instead of independence and accountability. And little boys grow up learning to seek accountability and independence. But we can't do that if we want a functional society. Both sexes need to grow up learning to seek accountability and independence and to try to help other people to be a bit of a safety net and to be grateful when they have a real functional safety net, but not to rely on the idea that there will always be one. It's destroying our society. And that's one thing that fathers can do. Fathers are good at teaching independence. Fathers are good at teaching risk-taking and functional risk-taking. Not, hey, I want to see if I can use a blanket as a parachute when I jump off the roof, risk-taking. But, okay, so I might get an itchy welt if this bug bites me. risk taking. Don't pick up mosquitoes; they carry diseases. But yeah, and it'll take 30 years, and that's the unfortunate part of it. It'll take 30 years to get in enough of a generation of girls raised that way that they'll counter the namby-pamby vote. It looks like that's already started to a degree, but that's what we need more of. And so probably the most important issue that the men's rights movement can fight for out of everything that we fight for is fathers' rights.
And we've been pushing for this from the bottom up for as long as we can remember. And nature itself, evolution itself, has been pushing for this from the bottom up ever since we became Homo sapiens, and even before that, ever since we were Australopithecus or whatever. But we find ourselves in an unfortunate modernist situation where we've been cancelled out from the top down with this feminist bullshit that has taken over the media and the government and all that. And yeah, we for our lifetimes, we've been trying to combat this with this bottom-up system, with this grassroots movement of trying to say, look, fathers are important, just as important as mothers. But I don't know how to approach this when we are grassroots against sky down. Like I don't I don't know what I don't know how I can poetically paint this as something that's the opposite of grassroots other than sky down, and I don't know what to call sky down other than this fucking this government and media monopoly over things, and I don't know how to fight that other than with a leadership, a rulership, and that's why I'm talking about something needs to happen to overhaul this sky down system, and that's why I keep talking about monarchy or something similar to it. That
the problem is
that's what
monarchy
worked.
is just another sky down system.
I know.
Been going on
that's what I mean.
What's been going on during the last 40 or 50 years is that the fathers' rights movement has been making slow but steady progress from changing custody standards in the United States, in particular, changing custody standards from presumptive maternal custody to joint custody to shared parenting, and now to equally shared parenting as the default in divorce cases. And where equally shared parenting becomes the default, divorce goes down and children end up being raised in stable two-parent homes. So that's one thing. And the lobbying and letter writing end of the men's rights movement that contacts legislators has been putting on a pressure campaign for that route for years. And there are now several states in the U.S. that have default equally shared parenting as how they, approach if the parents decide to do something else, or there's a real serious problem, right? One of the parents is needs to go to rehab, or is an abuser, or is going to move across the country and be thousands of miles away from their kid. Like you can't transfer every week all the way across country like that. But in most cases, they when the kids, or when the parents get divorced, the kids live part-time with one parent, part-time with the other parent, and it's half and half. So the father does get time to be more than just a walking wallet. He does get time to go out in the backyard and play catch and teach the kid to have the sportsmanship to tough out disappointment when he misses the ball, or when she throws and it doesn't quite reach dad, or when she's out, if they're playing a game and stuff like that, which teaches a lot about character that mothers ignore. And so you do have change taking place. It's just very, very important that we keep it up. It's exhausting, but it is very, very important. People continue to write their legislators. They continue to support organizations like the National Coalition for Men that actually go through and they don't just lobby. They also use the court system to get things changed. And supporting organizations like us and A Voice for Men so that we can get the word out to more people. We've gotten this discussion into the mainstream, and it's only taken, only the last 10 years to really push it forward. This discussion has been going on in the men's rights movement before many of us were involved in it for decades without the mainstream realizing or understanding it. And now you have influencers that, 10 or 15 years ago, they'd have been talking about everything except men and everything except men's situations and issues. And they are talking about it now. And they're looking at the various details, and they're not just considering it from a gynocentric perspective. And even those that had been considering it from just a gynocentric perspective are starting to consider more egalitarian perspectives. So things are changing in a positive. It's just, it seems slow, but we've had, in comparison to how things were during, say, the previous 100 years, we have had a giant leap forward in the last 10. But with that, I think we really need to call it a night for HBR Talk, because it has been a couple of hours, and poor Brian's got to be doing this in the background the whole time. So I am going to say we don't have any other super chows, and I have not seen any super chats go through. I haven't seen any brightly colored mentions here go through. So I don't think we have them. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. And if I did, I apologize. But thanks, Mike, for going through more UN women bullshit with me. We will finish this article next week.
Yay!
And then we might look at if there's anything in the Brazil, it's not just Brazil, it's all of South America. In the South America document that's not in the Africa document, we'll look at that. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure most of what I saw in those documents, they mirrored each other. They just had a slightly different wording based on the cultures. So that's what we'll be doing next week. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next Thursday. Good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.